Welcome to Plan 9 Crunch. I'm Doug Gibson, and today we have the honor of having a conversation with Bill Fleck, who is quite well known. He's Rondo nominated. He has written two Lon Chaney Jr. works. One is called Chaney's Audition is the more recent one. And what was the first one called again? I just read it now.
Chaney's Baby.
Chaney's Baby, that's what it's called. You know what? I'm getting
right
old.
There.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I love those books. They're really
you.
interesting because you take his sentiments and also you go into back old newspaper archives to find how people were talking. And before I forget, because I hate to do this, tell me your Substack address. All right. Also,
billfleck.substack.com.
Okay. He has a lot of good stuff there. I just read today. You did Man of a Thousand Faces, a blog of that. I also read a couple of days ago one where you talked about the relationship between Lon Chaney and in The Wolfman with
Evelyn Ankers?
Evelyn Ankers, yeah. Evelyn Ankers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to get more about that because they had a very complicated relationship.
Yeah, and it's too bad because they actually had a lot in common, and I don't think they ever had a discussion about it.
Yeah, because she had a domineering mother, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Yeah, she did. She had a mother who got her into show business. Evelyn wanted to be a ballerina, and she didn't want to do the actress thing. But her father had deserted the family for a girlfriend, and so Evie's mom pushed her into the acting because that's where the money was. It certainly was for Evie anyway. And so she was not thrilled at all with doing the movie acting or anything like that. Her dream was someplace else. So she kind of got pushed into it because, somebody had to be the breadwinner. And I don't know that Lon Jr. knew that or understood that. He got pushed into acting in his own way.
Well, let's go back a little bit here.
Sure.
Describe Lon Chaney Sr. as a father to Lon Chaney Jr.
Well, Lon Chaney Sr. was a very honorable guy. He was a man of his word. He was not somebody who enjoyed the accoutrements of stardom or anything like that. He was not a flashy guy. There was nothing kind of, Errol Flynn about him. Let's kind of put it that way. Down to earth. Most of his friends were people who worked on the films, but not the stars in front of the cameras. And so, but he was also a stubborn guy. His brother George gave an interview with Forrest J. Ackerman many years later. And he did say that, Lon, you're a stubborn guy. You didn't move him, off his opinions too easily. And now you've got his son, who was born Creighton Tull Chaney. His first name, Creighton, comes from his mom's last name. She was Frances Cleveland Creighton. She was known as Cleva.
Now, she was more successful early on than her husband, right?
Yeah, it was funny because she had responded to an ad for dancers and singers. And a friend of hers, they worked at the phone company. A friend of hers said, like, "Hey, listen, you've got the voice. You need to go and you need to get into the theater type of thing." And she walked in against her mother's wishes. Her mother thought that show business people were kind of immoral and they would have a bad effect on her. But she finally allowed it, and she went in. And the person she meets behind the curtain is Chaney, who was not only involved in performing, but he also evaluated talent, and he was also apparently involved in building sets. Because that particular morning he comes out and he's dressed like a carpenter and he's been working. And he just kind of, according to the story anyway that she told later on, he kind of looked her up and down and said, "Yeah, you can't dance."
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And she says, "Yeah, but I can sing." And she said, "Let me sing for you." Words to that effect. And he's like, "Hey, I got a lot to do today." And she says, "I really can sing." So I guess it kind of dawned on him, she's not going anywhere unless, he hears her sing. And of course, she had this absolutely marvelous voice. So he took her into the company. And he worked it out so that all she had to do was sing. He didn't have her dancing or anything along those lines. And of course, they fell in love. And after a couple of months, she's got news for him. There's a baby coming. And it's not the time period now where everybody kind of goes like,
Exactly.
They weren't married. And So they're like, "Ooh, what are we going to do about this?" I mean, both of them are kind of like frozen in their tracks, and they ended up kind of like turning tail and going back to Cleve's mom, Maddie's house. And a few months later, that's where Lon Jr. was born, prematurely. We'll get to the story that he told about his birth, somewhere down the line here, but he was indeed born prematurely, and they got married 3 months later.
The marriage went.
They kept that, of course. They kept that quiet because such things weren't done back then. You talk about 1906. Mm-hmm. Such things weren't done at that particular time. But with Lon Sr. and Lon Jr., the biggest issue, I think, was that Lon Jr. had a lot of the characteristics of Cleva Creighton, his mom.
Oh, that's interesting.
She was tall for a lady. She could sing. So she was very talented. Dark-haired, Irish ancestry. She had blue eyes. But she was very, very, she didn't have a lot of confidence in herself. And criticism cut her deeply. Mm. And as you mentioned, she was initially the more successful of the two, which also caused some jealousy. Lon as a man at that time was sort of like, well, I should be winning the bread here. And, she shouldn't really be doing what she's doing. And her job in the cabarets and stuff required her to sing and then to sit around and have some drinks with the male clientele afterwards. And, you got Chaney, who was kind of a jealous guy anyway. He's sort of like, well, what's this all about? And then, she drank too much, which was characteristic of the son as well. And she attempted suicide.
That's a big dramatic beginning of your book, the suicide attempt.
Yeah, I mean, that's what convinced me to write the book. I was, I'm a monster kid from third grade. I saw Abbott and Costello Frankenstein and, the Talbot character and all that. And we can get into that a little bit later on. But I really loved that he was this guy who was cursed, but he was crusading. He was out there trying to do good. He was trying to stop Dracula from reviving the monster. And to this day, not 100% sure exactly what Dracula was going to do with the Frankenstein monster with Lou Costello's brain in there. But I've read on the internet since then that maybe he would have been the keeper. The day keepers, protect the coffin. He could certainly lug it around. We saw that in the film. And, if you stay here and watch over my tomb, yes, master. I can see it happening pretty well, So, but I like that this guy, Talbot, who was a moral guy and was afflicted and was very, very, very regretful of his affliction, didn't want to be doing what he was doing, was still going from place to place, hunting these guys down to try to do some good. And I thought that was a really great and moving character. So, of course, I went in, I'm my third grade self. I'm telling my friends, hey, guys, don't call me Billy anymore. You just call me Talbert. Talbert, because of Bud Abbott, Talbot, with his Jersey accent.
We don't use Talbot. Our dog's name is Talbot.
I hope I didn't get him stirred up.
No, well, he's not here right now. I'm at I'm at my daughter and her partner's apartment right now to do this. But I want to ask you: do you think The Wolfman is Lon Chaney Jr.'s best film?
Well, it's certainly one he's most remembered for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's great in it. If I were to pick his greatest performance, of course, that's Lenny in Mice and Men, which he always felt was his best performance as well. I mean, was he great as Larry Talbot too? Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that, he takes the knock on is that, the character is written in the final film is the son of an English lord, and there's nothing English, and certainly his accent, there was nothing English about Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance as Larry Talbot, which is kind of interesting to me because he did have, English ancestry. And the point I kind of want to argue is, okay, here, let's begin with this. Accents at that time in Hollywood, nobody really cared. Mm-hmm. You got Claude Rains nominated for an Academy Award a couple of years later for his Louis in Casablanca.
What about Louise Rainier in Pearl Buck's movie, right?
Yeah, and he gets hit too in Son of Dracula for not having the Hungarian or Romanian accent. And the point I argue there is that everybody else in the film is supposed to be from the Deep South. They don't sound like they're from the Deep South. So people at that particular time didn't care. But if you're looking for an in-context kind of answer, the short version for me that I've kind of come up with is that You know, when Larry left to go to America, he left to go to America. He left behind his old life. It wasn't working for him. He wanted to go someplace new, and he wanted to have a completely new identity. And in America, I feel like Larry, who works with his hands, you know, and can solve any problem, as he says, if he can be, you know, electric current and tubes and wires. This is somebody who likes to be in charge of his own destiny. And he was not going to be in charge of his own destiny at Sir John Talbot's castle, particularly with his brother in front of him. And so when Larry reinvented himself as an American, he did the total remake. And that includes thinking and speaking like an American, which the Larry Talbot character does. So if you think of it in terms of that kind of context, I think it's a great performance. I think it's a great performance anyway, but I think it becomes better if we kind of have that frame of reference.
Well,
but yes,
him going after Evelyn's character is very American, I think. Don't you agree?
Oh, very much. And he takes knocks on that on the internet.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, I spend too much time on social media, kind of scrolling around. I should be doing more writing. You know, yeah. And you know, oh, Larry Talbot, what a creep. You know, he finds her in the telescope. It's like, okay, he finds her in the telescope by accident, but all right. And he doesn't look away and like, okay, hello world, let me introduce you to men. And then, but I mean, at his time, yeah, his aggressive flirting at that time, there was a definite boys will be boys attitude. So if we want to put that frame of reference to us now in 2025, yeah, you know, Larry's a little bit aggressive.
This is way out of the box, but Chaney reminded me when he was courting people a little bit of Lee Tracy in like Dr. X or something. Okay.
Well, yeah. Yeah. You know, that was I don't want to say a standard Hollywood cliche, but it was a standard understanding that, you know, yeah, these guys are going to be aggressive about what they did, you know, kind of thing. And of course, the whole Dr. X thing is really funny because she ends up with him.
Yeah.
You know, exactly. Which is, you know, oh, wait, no. She's close to ending up with him. And then her editor finally steps up, right? But
I think, well, she's Fay Ray, and they end up on the beach together.
Right. Yeah, I got it mixed up with the.
You're mixed up with Mystery of the Wax Museum.
Yeah, that's Mystery of the Wax Museum.
That's a trope. Right. That's a trope in movies. Editors bemoaning the fact they lose their female reporters to the guy at the end of a film.
Yes. Yeah.
No, you can watch them in Monogram movies.
Funny. I just saw those films back to back, like probably a month ago.
Now, tell me, I want to ask you a question.
Together in my head.
But Lon Chaney's an honorable man. I totally agree with you. But he didn't tell his son that his mother was alive. No,
and that I think was the biggest moral failing that he had. He grew to hate Cleva, so much so. I mean, the divorce petition was pretty vicious, and they reproduced letters that she had written to lovers and all that kind of stuff. She didn't even show up. She sent a letter to the judge and basically was begging, you know, let me see my kid and return love to me for evil as you've always done. I mean, she knew she was culpable, but apparently she was a mess at that particular time. She was drinking too much. You know, she was, Chaney accused her of being, you know, shacked up with a bartender acquaintance of theirs. And there was a lot of truth at that particular point in her life to the idea that she might not have been the best person to raise a child. Mm-hmm. And when the court sort of granted her permission, as long as she was sober, to see her son, you know, supervised, in the back of Chaney's mind, he's just like, yeah, no, that's not happening. And the best way to do that, well, I mean, he lost his job at the theater where they were working because of the scandal, and he ended up going into motion pictures because of it. So that is, you know, that's a positive externality, as they used to say in economics. But, you know, there's no guarantee he was going to be the success that he was. But he wanted to cut what he thought was a cancer out of their lives, and that was Cleva. And I guess for him, the easiest way to do that was to say, like, well, you're never going to have a chance to see her because she's dead. And that's pretty harsh. I mean, you can make a case for him kind of sitting the kid down, I mean, and saying to him, you know, I mean, he was around 6 or 7 when they divorced. You kind of say, like, you know, yeah, things weren't working out with your mom and me. She's in a really bad place right now. I think it's better if you and I don't have anything to do with her. But at some point, if she gets her life back together, okay, she and I are done. We're not getting back together. But at some point she gets her life back together, we can check in and see if you can have some sort of relationship with her. And that might have done it, but that's not what he chose to do.
I want
And that's
to
tough.
talk about the elder Chaney. He didn't want Lon Chaney. He didn't want Creighton Chaney to be an actor, right?
No, he did not.
So this whole thing about Jimmy, about writing Lon Chaney Jr. on the deathbed is nonsense.
Oh,
He
it's
did
so
not-
far up.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful scene at the end of or at the end of Man of a Thousand Faces. You know, he's dying in the cabin, which didn't happen. He died in a hospital in Los Angeles, and he's surrounded by family. Well, there might have been a couple of them there. Depends on the newspaper report that you read.
You know, when you were talking about in your Substack saying, yeah, they don't do biographies like that anymore, my first thing was say, yes, they do. They do Ed Wood. And then I thought, my God, Ed Wood's been over 30 years ago. This is what happens to you. Okay.
Yeah, you know, I think of Saving Private Ryan from 1998 as a recent film.
So do I. And I'm beginning to accept the fact that 80s films are old films, but not the 90s.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell the joke, like, I think I'm 18 years old. And I look in the mirror and I see a dead Allman Brother. And my younger son's like, yeah, Pop, I've heard that for years. Not going to lie, I had to look it up.
Okay. So Lon Chaney remarried Hazel.
Yes.
And it ended up being, unfortunately, a tough relationship with her and Creighton Chaney.
At the end, because of the lie. Creighton was very, very happy to have her in his life early on. He still referred to her, as my little Italian mother. She was about 4 feet 10 inches. Mm-hmm. She had an Italian ancestry. I think it was on her mom's side. I have to check that for sure. But she was very, very good to him, and he did love her.
I saw a picture of her on the blog today in the Substack.
Yeah. And she and Lon were a good team. They actually supported each other very, very well.
The lie caused the rift, didn't it?
Well, the lie caused the rift with the son. Yeah. In the film, they have the Hazel character saying to Lon, "You don't tell him that his mother's alive, he's going to hate you." And I don't know that ever actually occurred. You would kind of think at some point it would have had to, but Hazel never broke that and never went to Chaney Jr. and never said, your dad's got something to tell you that I think you ought to ask him about, And when it became obvious that she was alive at the reading of the will, because Lon had left Cleve a dollar, so she couldn't contest the will. Lon had a friend who was a reporter, Adela Rogers St. John. And she had no idea there was a Cleva Creighton. And she was like, who is this? And she was the one who actually tracked down Cleva first. And she was the one that Cleva told her story to. And she was the one that was angry when Adela published it because she didn't feel like she was treated very fairly and she wanted to sue. But she told the story about how she hadn't seen her son since divorce, only once, through a window when he was an adult. And I to this day, I don't know what window that was, where she was standing, et cetera, et cetera. But the film, of course, has them reuniting earlier. And that's got a lot of people believing it, including people in the family. Now, is it possible? Of course, it's possible. But from the contemporary sources at the time, and Michael F. Blake, specifically the Lon Chaney Sr., guru of biographers, they're all like, that occurred. That occurred when he found out that his mother was alive. James Cagney told that story, et cetera, et cetera. And the ferocity that Creighton went after Hazel for what he believed should have been part of his fortune is also testament to that. He was livid, absolutely livid. And the end of that movie, Cagney writes Junior on the makeup box. In real life, Junior didn't even get the makeup box.
Exactly. And then that's interesting because Lon Chaney Jr. tried to follow his father's wishes. He married into a wealthy at the time family. He took an office job. It didn't work out though, did it?
Well, it would have, but he decided he was going to go into acting. His father-in-law, Ralph Hinckley, was a very successful guy, and he started a water heater corporation. Is very successful, and Chaney started there, making the things, and then he met Ralph's daughter, Dorothy, and he married the boss's daughter, and that's where the two grandkids come from. And Lon Ralph, the oldest, was named after both of his grandfathers, Lon for Lon Chaney, Ralph for Ralph Hinckley. And I'm trying to think where I was going with this. Oh, okay. So Chaney, Creighton had risen in the company to the point where he was the secretary for the company. And of course, that's exactly what Lon wanted. Lon saw a lot of Cleva in his son, and he thought that show business would cut Creighton up like it cut Cleva up. That every criticism would hit him, and
it might have been
possibly. Well, as it turned out, there was a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
But he kind of, the son there, he kind of suggested the acting thing every now and again. He had friends at Hollywood High School who would make some extra money on the weekends, going in and doing extra work. And when he sort of suggested that to Lon, man, he put the kibosh on that awfully quick. And he got, other jobs. He was a fruit picker and all that other kind of stuff. But so the time came for the acting. He actually quit the job at the water heater company. On the say-so, a friend who was an assistant director or something said he was going to give him a call. He'd heard him sing a song that he had written himself, and he said, "Oh, you're Lon Chaney's son. You ought to be in pictures." And on the basis of that, Creighton was sort of like, "Yeah, that hit me just right." I guess he didn't really like, what he was doing. His dad had died by then, and there was a little bit of, Greg Menk, in one of his books, describes it as an almost vengeful dream that Creighton Chaney had to top his father. And I think, as in so many things, I think Greg Menk is 100% right. I think it was a vengeful dream. Oh, my dad didn't want me to go into acting, and he lied to me about my mom. I'm going to go into acting, and I'm going to top the bastard. And I think that was what drove him. And his wife
his wife introduced marriage, essentially, right? The stress also maybe of her father losing his money too,
they got hit by the Depression pretty hard because water heaters were considered to be a luxury item. You can imagine that. So it was one of the first things that people would cut out of their budget. Like, oh, what do you want to do with the house? Well, I don't know. What kind of money you got? I don't have that kind of money, so I guess we're not heating water that way. And so the executives in the company, they took big cuts to try to keep as many people in that company employed, which they did do. And Chaney's wife, Dorothy, was very much responsible for that. The older son, Lon Ralph, actually found his way into that company. And, the dad died. Dorothy's dad died in the mid-40s, 1946, I want to say, of a horseback riding accident of all things. So that was kind of unexpected. And she ended up taking over the company and did, from what I can find in my research.
Is one of my hobbies is going to Screen Picks Western or Encore Western and looking for Creighton Chaney in the credits. Sure. And I've watched a few of those movies where he usually just plays the bad guy, in these Westerns. So he really didn't make it. It was a long slog for several years in serials or Westerns. And I have to give him perseverance for that because he never seemed to give up. But there were times where there wasn't a lot of food, right? And he canned food because of his fear of being hungry. And I've checked out a bunch of those early films. And what's fascinating to me is that he's usually as good or better than everybody else in those films. Well, he has screen presence.
His acting at that time was of the 30s, as was everybody's. And you get him into The Wolfman, and it's a different story. But he's as good as John Wayne was in the film they did together. He's as good as Tom Tyler was in the film they did together. It didn't seem that he was going to be a star. I think they were kind of like casting him in those roles where it's basically like, don't shoot him now, I have a better plan type of thing. And I don't think that's where he wanted it to go because he did, I think, really want to be a bigger name than his dad for kind of some of the reasons that we've discussed. And when that didn't happen and they wouldn't pick up his option, there were some lean years. There's no question there were some lean years. The story of the play of Mice and Men was that they hadn't eaten for like 48 hours when his agent came along with the offer for the play, and he jumped at it without not having any idea what the role was or anything like that.
Well, that was kind of the break, right? The break for Chaney, just like Dracula may have been the big break for Lugosi at the time.
Oh yeah. And what was funny about Chaney with the Mice and Men was he was the toast of the town there for a while. I mean, at the premiere, everybody's patting him on the back afterwards and all that kind of stuff. he always kind of told a lie to the press that he'd been nominated for an Academy Award for it. He hadn't. He should have been. The film was nominated for an Academy Award as Best Picture, but within a year, he would describe it later on in the 60s as being flat on his back again. He said, because, from then on in, they just wanted him to play a Lenny. And he said, who writes Lennies? And, of course, they did have him reprise that, I don't know how many times.
Well, in Man-Made Monster, he's Lenny, more or less, to some degree.
A little bit.
Not,
I mean, I kind of
not as developedly challenged as Lenny. Oh.
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like Dan McCormick gets kind of unfairly categorized as that. And here's my theory, and this is why. He has to be told by the Hines character there, what immunity is. Sort of like I was vaccinated against it. But the truth of the matter is that's really his only, quote unquote, dumb moment. Mm-hmm. If you look at the character of Dan McCormick throughout, he's a simple guy. He's not, he's not an intellectual like they tried to sell him later on in the Inner Sanctum series and all that. But he's not a dummy. This is a guy who's making his living on the road, doing tricks that are potentially life-threatening.
That's a good point.
So he's got to be smart enough to deal with that stuff. He's got to be smart enough to know if he's building the props or if he's buying them, he's still got to know what's going on with that. And he makes a living. He's autonomous in his environment. He travels from place to place. He puts on a good show. And he's also willing to roll with the punches. Mm-hmm. Well, the unemployment doesn't start for 2 weeks, but I guess something will come up, kind of thing. So I want to argue that Dan McCormick is not a dumb guy. I would argue that he's a simple guy. And I think that a lot of the aspects of Chaney really fulfill that in that particular role. I mean, I have one of the shooting scripts, and there's a great line in the film that does not appear in the script. Sure, me and dogs always get along. That's not the shooting script. So these are things that George Wagner is picking up about Chaney, and he's putting them in the film, and he's kind of stamping Chaney all over that film. And I find it to be, a marvelous performance. It's a great way to spend an hour.
I love that movie. It's under an hour, I believe, right?
Yeah, 59 minutes, I think.
I want to get, he attains success, and you wrote about the tryout, the Universal tryouts.
Right, the audition,
like Mice and Men and Man-Made Monster. What was the original title for Man-Made Monster again?
Well, there's a couple. The Mysterious Dr. R.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Yeah, and then there was Dr. R. I mean, the original thing goes back to a short story called The Electric Man. Mm-hmm. And then they'd written that up under the Lemleys for Karloff and Lugosi. They were going to call it The Man in the Cab. And then the new regime came into Universal, around 1936, and they looked over the upcoming projects, and that went on the shelf. And then later on, they gave it to George Wagner to kind of dust off, and we're going to bring Lon Chaney Jr. in. We really liked him in the 1 million BC, and we might be able to do something with him. So, dust that off and put this together, and, we'll see how this all goes. That's why I called Man-Made Monster like Chaney's audition, which he passed with flying colors because before the film even came out, they hired him to a contract. The film finished in December, and they signed him in January.
Though the money amounts are incredible. I mean, they're making a lot of money back then when you compete it with $24. I was surprised.
Well, yeah. I mean, I made the point that he never got to be the huge star that he wanted to be. He never got to top his father. Mm-hmm. But you adjust in terms of, inflation, you adjust his salary at his top. When he was at Universal, it's about $2.4 to $2.7 million a year today.
That's a lot.
I take it. I take that.
He doesn't get the role in Phantom of the Opera.
No.
And then he's doing all these shambling movies for The Mummy.
Yeah.
Is that where things started to go sour with Universal?
I think things started to go sour with the assignment to Ghost of Frankenstein.
Oh, okay.
Okay. He was promised when he got hired, there was no concept of the Wolfman. I mean, they had a Karloff script from back in the day. I think Robert Fleury did it, but nobody was thinking about that, and we monster kids have always kind of assumed that, well, he made Man-Made Monster and then they pushed him into the Wolfman. Well, no, there was about 8, 9, 10 months in between the two. And Chaney made a bunch of films in between the two, reprising Lenny in a couple of them. And then, of course, he did these great films, including North of the Klondike with Brad Crawford. And they became fast friends, those two clowns, along with Andy Devine. And they told all that roughhousing and et cetera, et cetera. We can get into that a little bit later on. But your question was, Ghost of Frankenstein. Yeah. He had been promised, as I say, a variety of roles. And he does really well in The Wolfman. It's his original character. It's completely different than what Henry Hall did in Werewolf of London. And so he's got this that, he would say later on was his baby. Mm-hmm. This was my character. This is my favorite horror character because he is mine. Then he's assigned Ghost of Frankenstein, and the newspapers call it the Boris Karloff role, which of course it was.
Yeah.
But how do you okay, so now I'm getting that. And then he looks around and here comes the Mummy now. Oh, and I'm going to be Dracula now. So he's not getting a chance to create the original characters like Laurie Talbot that he wants to create. Instead, he's being assigned, when he's starring, he's being assigned monster roles that other people have made famous. Mm-hmm. Or he's being assigned small comedy parts or small tough man parts. Because as he said, during that time, it didn't seem like Universal knew what to do with him until The Wolfman. And then they decided that they could make money with his name on horror pictures. And come on, if you're going to top your father, you can't be playing the Mummy. Not the way it's written.
And also, Universal's horror films started to descend in quality in the 40s.
Yeah. I mean, they're a lot of fun. Yeah. But yeah, come on. I mean, I love Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
I like it too. It's a great movie.
Are there huge holes in it? Yeah. I mean, the first half is really pretty cool. And then you get to the monster, and they cut Bela's part and did all that to him, which that's a project down the line for me. I'm going to try to examine what might have happened had Bela actually been able to deliver the dialogue in the film and had it gone out that way, But then you get to House of Frankenstein. You get to, I mean, he's very, very, very good in all of those. He brings out that pathos, and I think that's one of the things for me that attracts me to Chaney.
You're right.
He's very relatable. He's a very relatable actor.
You can't relate to him in the Mummy films. I just
no, because he's got nothing to do for you to relate to. There is a case to be made that the Mummy films are sort of prototype Halloween films. Mm-hmm. You sort of have this faceless, lumbering killer that is going to get you sort of, and of course all the shadow work they did in the Mummy's film, particularly I want to say Mummy's Ghost. I'll have to check myself on that for sure. But there was a lot of people seeing like, I saw a shadow out the window, and they're calling the police. Like, yeah, my wife saw a shadow. Kind of thing. Oh, so she saw a shadow, huh? So we're gonna be running out. But you get a lot of that in the Halloween movies as well.
Now, were the Inner Sanctum films an attempt by Universal to give him what they would consider more sophisticated roles, or just another assignment for Chaney?
Well, I think there's a little bit of both. The Inner Sanctum radio series was incredibly successful. And I think when Universal got the line on being able to do those films, I mean, their first thought, of course, is the bottom line. Now you got Chaney, right? You're making these sort of like mystery, semi-slash horror pictures, and you've got this guy griping that he's not getting the kinds of parts that he wants. And, his name had some marquee value. He wasn't, as I say, he wasn't Bogart. He wasn't Marlene Dietrich. He wasn't Gable. But, you put him on kind of an exploitation horror flick, and people go like, oh, yeah, Lon Chaney. Yeah, I'll go see that. And so I think it was a commercial decision first. And then I think it was a personnel decision afterwards. Like, well, somebody's got to play these parts. And we're doing the films like in 2 weeks for about $150,000. Give it to Chaney. Okay, you're griping that you're always a mummy. Well, now you're a hypnotist. Go ahead. And the funny thing is, I have seen those films within the last 2 weeks.
Have you? I own those films too. Yeah,
I do too. I actually picked up. I had a DVD that series of them that I lost, and so probably 2 weeks ago, I picked all 6 of them up on DVD and I watched them. And what I found was, and see if you agree. What I found was that the first 3 that were directed by Reginald Leborg were good films, and he was really good in them. And then what I found was after Reggie left the series, the first one, I forget the name of it, but Chaney was way off the reel on that one. You needed somebody to come in. I felt like in the, hey man, Lon, dial this back about 20%. Strange Confession was pretty decent, and then the last one was Pillow of Death. He wasn't even in it all. Yeah, he wasn't even in it all that much.
No, my favorite, even though I don't think it's the best directed one, is Strange Confession for some reason. I like the way that J. Carrol Naish manipulates him and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a remake of a film called The Man Who Lost His
Yeah,
Head or something.
Man Who Lost His Head, and that was, I think it was Claude Rains' film.
Claude Rains, yeah.
Which gets us again back to the Phantom, because the press was announcing that Phantom was going to be remade, and they had a couple different names that were attached to the project, directing and also to be the star. They were talking about Brad Crawford at one point as being the lead, and they were also talking about Charles Laughton, who of course had done Hunchback of Notre Dame so well. And interestingly, another connection about that, if we're going to go, do these deep rabbit hole dives, Chaney had tested with RKO for Hunchback of Notre Dame, even though he always told the press, I won't be doing any of my father's roles, kind of thing. He really wanted that badly. And he was second in line. RKO basically said to him, look, Charlie's got some problems with tax here in the United States. If he can't work them out, we're giving it to you. But Laughton worked it out. And honestly, I think Lon would have been a very, very good Quasimodo. I think he would have done very well. The Phantom, as written, the Claude Rains character, the sympathetic, was he the love, or was he the unrequited lover of Christine, or was he actually her father? There's all kinds of theories about that. Guy was kind of a milquetoast, and until he went nuts and killed the guy who stole his music, kind of thing, or tried to. But he did. But I think when the rewrite came along, and they made him a softer character, I think that's when George Wagner and company said, yeah, this is not Lon's cup of tea.
It would have been fascinating to see Lon Chaney Jr. try.
I would. He certainly would have loved it. Yeah. I don't know if he would have pulled off the character with the sympathy that Claude Rains did. But getting sympathy was Chaney's thing, so that might have been a boat that sailed that was a real big missed opportunity.
Now, Chaney married a woman named Patsy, who was a friend
Yes.
from his childhood. And that marriage survived, but it probably survived due to a lot of tolerance and also enabling, probably, right?
On her part, yeah. There's a great interview with Patsy in a Film Facts magazine from about 1990. Mm-hmm. And, at the time she was contemplating maybe writing her own book. And she was kind of reticent in her answers. She was kind of holding some stuff back. And the interview appears to have been edited because Greg Menk has a great quote from the interview that doesn't appear in the magazine. It's in his Vice and Men book. And the interviewer was a guy named Gary Dorst, who was, I think, 21 at the time. And he asked, Patsy directly, when you first met, Creighton, when you first met Lon, did you like him? And her response was no. And that's not in the interview as printed. So Greg Menk must have gotten the unedited interview, which
I'm going to be asking, emailing Greg Menk to find out more about.
He's great. He's great. I met him at Munster. I read his books, when I was young. A big hero of mine.
A few years ago, he came out with 3 mini biographies. I have it somewhere. My Kindle has 700 books on it, so it's hard to find sometimes.
Yeah.
But okay, so I want you to tell us about.
So Patsy, Patsy.
Keep going. I should have cut you off. Keep going.
Oh no, that's okay. Patsy hung in there a long time. They got together in, pretty much right after he and Dorothy broke up, and they got married kind of secretly in 1937. And then somebody leaked that Lon Chaney's son had gotten married, and newspapers called him up. And he's like, "Well, I guess you can't keep anything secret in this town," and blah blah blah. And they were together almost 36 years, or maybe it was 36 years. It was rough. It was rough, particularly, hey man, look, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I've done the blended families thing myself a couple of times, and honestly, again, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm not good married. Okay, so and other people's kids in the relationship, unless you have two very, very self-actualized adults, that can be rough. And with Lon's 2 sons, there was some issues. There was some issues there, and I don't want I deal with it in Chaney's Baby a little bit. I don't really want to get into
his son
that
was
aspect.
in a lot of trouble, right? and then it drove
His
Lon.
younger son, yeah, his younger son, Ron, did get into some trouble. And he got into some trouble uh, fairly soon before Lon Jr.'s suicide attempt.
Yeah.
And he told the cops, when they came to ask about, what was happening with Dad, he said, well, he said, my stepmom and my dad, they were having a major argument, a family argument, he called it. They've been arguing a lot lately. Now, what the argument was about, nobody's ever said 100%. And, so I don't want to really guess.
No, we don't need to guess. It's just, it seems like a point that there were tremendous stresses on losing your career with Universal, perhaps disappointment with what was going on in your immediate family, and despair and things like that.
And the fact that his upbringing was what it was.
Yeah.
I don't know that he ever came to terms with that. You discover that your dad, who you idolize, but at some points chose to spend time with folks other than you.
Yeah.
Like John Jesk, for example.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
John
You write
Jesk,
about him a lot in the book.
I write about him a lot because he was a major figure in Chaney Sr.'s life that a lot of people don't know. Mike Blake, of course, knows about John Jesk. Mm-hmm. But there's a great book called Lon Chaney's Shadow by Suzanne Gargiulo, and it's basically a biography of John Jesk and what he meant to Chaney and the Chaney family. And John Jesk was a guy who was born in Poland. His mom was Polish. His dad was German. He came here to the States. He ended up working in a auto mechanic garage that Lon Chaney frequented. Mm-hmm. And Lon came in one day and like, hey, who's the new guy? And they got introduced and they hit it off. Next thing you know, Jesk is working for the Chaney family as a chauffeur. But he's also secretly helping Lon put the makeup for the Hunchback of Notre Dame on. Now, he was not Lon's makeup man. Later on, that got in the papers and that drove Junior nuts. But he did help him get into those costumes. He did help him get into those harnesses and all that. And he did spend a lot of time with Lon Sr., time that Lon Jr. believed should have been spent with him. Who's this guy? Why is he taking up all of Dad's time? And my time with Dad is an important kind of thing. And again, Lon Sr. being kind of the hard guy that he was, well, you're going to make your own fortune. I did it. You're going to do it. You're not a rich man's son. You're not going to be a rich man's son. So the Jesk was big. And then later on, after Chaney's death, and Lon Jr. was, kind of hammering Hazel for more of a bigger cut of the pie, she and Jesk hatched like this harebrained plan to get married. And Hazel was in the hospital. She was dying of breast cancer. And Jesk shows up, at the county clerk or whatever, and he's going to try to get a marriage license. And the clerk is saying, like, well, where's she? Well, she's in the hospital, she's well, who is she? Hazel Chaney, Hazel Chaney, and so he leaves without the license and she makes a phone call to the newspapers and that gets all over the place. And so that kiboshed that plot. But that's how serious things were.
Well,
and that's
it just
how big
underscores all the stresses that were on Lon Chaney Jr.'s life that would lead to something like that.
So you get anything that along those lines triggers that. And as you said before, hoarding the food. He didn't invent that. Mm-hmm. His dad, in the Chaney family was kind of the guy who did that because his dad never really trusted the success. So even after Chaney got, he's shooting Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. He's talking to a reporter and he's saying like, yeah, I'm hunting, I'm fishing, I'm canning it all. I don't know how long this is going to last.
I just love that line that he said, and I'm reading it in the book. It would have been fun to visit Chaney's ranch, or where he lived in the 1940s and 50s. That would have been
That's one of the things that I don't think, and one of the things that made me kind of write Chaney's audition was, Chaney's baby necessarily, centered on a rough part in his life. The central theme of it is the suicide and, how that, what he was before and what he was after. Chaney's audition was sort of like my bookend for that. It's a happier time. He gets the contract with Universal and he's about as happy as he can be. And one of the aspects of his personality is his storytelling. He was a great storyteller, and he told stories with emotion, and he told stories with humor. He also told stories that weren't 100% true.
That's for sure. Yeah, a lot of stuff. But
But
you know
that's
what?
what a storyteller does.
I was thinking, reading your books, how wonderful it would be if you had any of those stories on YouTube saved somehow. But it's probably not. They're all gone.
There are one of the stories that does appear on YouTube is the story of his birth, which we alluded to earlier. It was premature, and he
And he
apparently had
talks
some.
in that. He talks in that.
Yeah,
Oh, I
there's
gotta find
an
that.
interview. There's a clip of it from 1969, and of course he just had
Throat
the
cancer.
surgery
Yeah.
on his throat. Yeah,
Yeah.
so he had the rough voice, and he tells the story of being born, basically dead, and his dad like snatches him. This is February 10th, 1906. His dad snatches him away from his mom, runs out of the cabin or wherever it was they were, and smashes through the ice of a lake or a body of water and dunks him in the freezing cold, and that shocks Chaney into life. Which, of course, it's a great story.
It's a great story.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't appear to be true in the least.
Well, Lugosi did that too. Lugosi did that.
He didn't start telling it until 1965.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I checked the weather reports for that period, and kind of warm. They're talking about continued fair weather. Stella Bush, who was Lon Chaney Jr.'s half sister, from Cleva Creighton, who remarried, she always said, "Yeah, it didn't happen." Heard it from her mom, I'm sure. Lon Ralph Chaney, who also knew his grandmother later on, said that wasn't true. But there is a truth in it for me, and the truth in it for me is that in the story, it's truly his dad who gives him life.
That's a good point.
Not his mom.
That's an excellent point. Yes.
And I think that's kind of profound for him.
Well, you're kind of ambiguous. Did they ever resolve themselves, Cleva and him?
Well, he took care of her when she would allow it.
Yeah.
There are pictures of her and him together. Then there's a little bit later on in the 50s, she got in trouble for shoplifting and stuff like that. So there was something about Cleva that was, kind of a little bit off. She did die in a convalescent home.
Yeah.
After having a stroke, but I can't nail down exactly when the stroke happened. I'm pretty sure that whatever happened, he was contributing financially at helping her out. There were reports in the 50s of her coming to visit him on certain film sets and bringing a picnic lunch and stuff like that. But I can't remember any time specifically that he referred to her in the press as his mom. When he talked about his mom, he was pretty much always talking about Hazel.
Lon Chaney, okay, he does very well in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. It's a great performance. Yeah. It might be the last time you see a Lon Chaney as he looked in the 40s, okay? Because several years later, you see the black sleep, and you see the effects of stress and probably alcohol too.
Oh, big time. Reginald LeBorg always reacted.
Yeah, I remember that. And tell us about what LeBorg said about.
Well, LeBorg, he was kind of an interesting guy, and he got saddled with he got saddled with one of the Mummy movies, and Chaney's performance in that is a little bit more lively than he did in the other couple. And then, he got the Inner Sanctum series, and LeBorg was the director on that. And according to LeBorg said, I kind of admire your dad, and I think you're doing a good job, and I'm sure you want to emulate him. And Lon Jr. said to LeBorg, "Emulate him? I want to top him." And he said, "We're going to do great things together, Pappy." And LeBorg felt a little bit weird about that. He thought, Pappy, I'm not that much older than he is, And then Chaney invited him over to the house, to meet Patsy, and they were doing a lot of drinking, and LeBorg didn't drink all that much, so they were kind of interesting. And then LeBorg, he took off. He didn't want to do those films anymore. He had some other things he wanted to do.
I want to get to know.
And Chaney was really upset by that. Yeah. We're supposed to do great things together. Well, we will. And then he sees him, it's 13 years later. And he says, man, it may be 13 years, but Chaney looks like 25, 30 years older.
Yeah, what's weird
because,
about
the suicide attempt had happened by then. And then LeBorg kind of said, I guess he decided to do it a different way. I guess he decided to drink himself to death.
I'm thinking about Chaney's resilience because you will see him in High Noon where he's very good.
Yeah.
And then you'll see him in The Black Sleep, okay, where he's entertaining. And then you'll see him in my personal favorite performance of Lon Chaney is The Defiant Ones. I think
that's a great
if he was
one.
ever going to get an Oscar, he should have got it for that, and also Mice and Men. But that same time, he makes the Mexican werewolf flick. Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did they release that as? Oh, that's horrible.
Something. You know what? I'm getting old, and
Yeah,
things
me
I
too.
know I don't remember on the spur of the moment. But
Yeah.
I've watched both the
I
Mexican
could probably
version,
look it up here.
Face of the Screaming Werewolf.
That's
Okay.
it. Okay.
And I've watched, I think it's a Jerry Warren film. I could be wrong.
Oh, it's terrible. He's a mummy who's brought back to life, and the mummy turns out to
And I'm
have been a
thinking,
werewolf.
why is Chaney doing this? And he's making the defiant ones at the same time, you know.
Well, he said about parts like that at that time. He's like, hey man, they're paying me money to come down there. I don't have really many lines to learn. Why not?
I think that makes sense. And
I'll
also,
grunt through it. And,
one of my guilty pleasures, and I can't remember the name right now because, of course, it's on the spot, but it's a David Hewitt anthology. It's just an absolute monstrosity of a movie. And he doesn't play the monster. He plays he plays a scientist, college professor who resurrects a Frankenstein type character.
Yeah, it's
John
not
Carradine's in that movie too.
Yeah, not ringing any bells for me right now. But
I wish I could remember the title. I just can't.
I'll look it up later.
I reviewed it on Plan 9 Crunch, but Tom Weaver wrote a pretty good review of it in Cult Movies Magazine.
Oh, wow.
And that brings up something more I want to talk about. About 30.
Tom Weaver, anything Tom Weaver does, I love that guy.
I love the guy too, but I disagree with him on Lugosi. Okay. I interviewed Tom Weaver when I was a newspaper editor. But anyways, so now am I losing my train of thought? Okay.
Well, I think we were talking about well, I mean, one point I want to bring up about
yeah, bring up your point, and I'll try to remember mine.
This is pretty cool. Tom Hamilton, who's that Rondo winning director of the Boris Karloff documentary a couple of years back, he kind of looked at the Talbot character in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. He kind of thought, like, wouldn't it have been cool if Universal picked up on that idea and made him sort of like this crusading monster hunter, carrying his curse with him, sort of like a precursor, to the Buffy series or to Supernatural. You kind of have that. It would have been kind of an interesting aspect to it.
A lot of stuff that we think is wonderful today, they never thought of, unfortunately, in the 30s and 40s. You know that?
Hey, man, they were grinding that stuff out. The question at that time was, what the hell do we do with Abbott and Costello next?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Let's do this. Okay. Oh, that worked.
It was like, it's almost like the silent people not realizing they would have a second home for those movies, and so many are lost as a result. By the way, I think Lon Chaney Sr.'s greatest performance, personally, to me, is The Unknown. All right.
Oh, it's a great one.
But I love all his movies. I love the scene where Joan Crawford tells him she's getting married. I don't see how a guy can act that well anywhere. What he just portrayed with his facial expressions is absolutely incredible.
Well, the guy was amazing. I mean, he's come down as a horror guy because among the small percentage of films of his that have survived are The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera. And, and then there's sort of the quasi-horror films like, The Miracle Man, Penalty.
The Monster? Mm-hmm.
The Monster. Yeah, where by the way, he's way over the top. Have you seen The Monster recently?
Yeah, I have. Well, I reviewed it.
Well, he's like way over. He's like,
It's just incredible. Also, I like the ones where he's like in Asia or Africa, and there's a young woman he doesn't like because of something. He tries to save her at the end.
Yeah, I mean, but he was a huge star and welcome in any genre. Have you seen the Marine one, Tales of the Marines?
Oh, yeah, it's a good movie, too.
Great in that. And I mean, of course, London After Midnight has sort of come down as a horror film, but, nobody's seen that in years.
No one ever will, I don't think, because I think they found it by now.
Yeah, I don't think. I think it went the same way as the, talking Bela scenes in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. I don't think we're ever going to see it.
But let me say something about Lon Chaney Jr. again now. Sure. Okay, that movie, by the way, that I can't remember, one of his titles was Return from the Past, but it's not his main title. But what's interesting about the film is it was released with Spider Baby. Okay, but it was not the same. David Hewitt, God forbid, didn't make Spider Baby. That was Jack Hill's baby, all right?
Yes.
And there's a big difference in quality there. But they both had Lon Chaney in it. And I like Chaney in Spider Baby. I like seeing Mantan Moreland. And I look at Chaney, and Jack Hill said in an interview in Cult Movies, he said, well, Chaney, told me not to film after certain hours. He only had one instance, but he was always giving 100% on the job. And I think that's true. What do you think?
It was part of his. It was actually part of the deal because they'd offered the part to Carradine, or oh no, they offered the part to Chaney for a certain amount of money, and he turned it down because it wasn't enough. And they said, okay, we're gonna get John Carradine, something like that. And Chaney's like, oh well, all right, I guess I'll take it. But they knew about his rep. So Chaney promised that he would do the film and get through it on one beer a day.
Yeah, that was it.
And I don't know, I don't know how he did it, but he did it. I mean, there's also, my view with the drinking and all that kind of stuff. I think you define Chaney as a functional alcoholic. He's not somebody who, like Errol Flynn, would come falling down and all that kind of stuff. I think, Chaney. I mean, yeah, all right. Charles Barton said later on, by the end of the day, he didn't know where he was. Maybe on some days. But this was
Chaney
a guy
was a solid actor. Based on, and what I read in your book, I found very.
I would say a functional alcoholic.
Yeah, yeah. Now I know what I was thinking about. About 35 years ago, Cult Movies magazine had this big debate for 2 issues on Chaney versus Lugosi and Frankenstein. And I grew up reading Cult Movies magazine. I'd go down to Barnes and Noble or something and buy it. And I want to interview Buddy Barnett on this show sometime.
Oh, I think it'd be great.
Yeah. But so anyways, I took that challenge because I'd always thought of Chaney as just the Wolfman, okay?
Right.
But I was younger. I didn't know as much of the genre. I think when you look at films like anything from Witchcraft to The Defiant Ones to High Noon to the movies you were talking about, the 1 Million BC, and the other one he made with the actor you talked about earlier, I think Chaney.
Rod Crawford.
Yeah, I think Chaney actually had more range than Lugosi and Karloff.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Now people might disagree with me on that. My favorite actor is Lugosi. I'm a Lugosi fanatic.
Yeah, and Lugosi can't play Lenny.
Yeah.
We've seen what Chaney did with Dracula, which I thought was interesting. I mean, was it what Lugosi did? No.
I thought it was it was a more aggressive Dracula. You know what? My son and I were disagreeing on this. I think Chaney's aggressive Dracula is a little bit like Skarsgård's aggressive Nosferatu in the recent film. Now that could be total nonsense. That's what I was thinking when I was watching.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Eggers, is familiar with Son of Dracula.
Oh, I'm sure this is Doug Gibson saying it, not Eggers. Okay.
Right, but certainly, like I don't know if he actually influenced the Christopher Lee depiction, but boy, you could certainly see elements of that. And I mean, he gets bammed a lot again because I read the internet too much when I should be working. But he gets dinged big time for, well, he doesn't have an accent. Well, it's like, yeah, again, we've talked about this accent thing. And could Chaney do an accent? Yes, he could have. There's a television show that he was excellent on that you can find on YouTube called The Golden Junk Man. And he plays the part the entire way through with a European accent. And he carries it off very well. So, had they wanted him to do it, he could have done it. Then he gets dinged for being, big. Like, where's the rule that says vampires have got to be skinny? I don't know where that is.
They're not.
And it's a different character than Lugosi. It's not the Lugosi character. It's not the Dracula that left Transylvania and got to London about 1930. The storyline with Son of Dracula has him, dying in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
And then so it's kind of a remake instead of going to London.
I like the movie. I mean, I've watched it probably 30 times, and I think it's a lot of fun. I also think, what's the actress's name who plays
Louise Alberton.
Louise Alberton. I thought she may have underplayed it, but she did a pretty good role, I thought.
She was great.
Yeah.
I find her to be absolutely excellent. And of course, she's the catalyst and really, really the main character.
Now, but somebody was telling me, well, Dracula's a kept man in that thing. He's being cuckolded. I thought, well, yeah, but he is. They're 2 vampires, all right? They don't have human ideals anymore. Yeah.
It's a noir.
Yeah.
It's a horror prototype noir. And of course, Robert Siodmak was the director there, Kurt's brother. And he went on to do some great noir stuff, including that one that broke Burt Lancaster. Oh, he played a boxer. It'll come to me. It's based on a Hemingway story.
I know what you're talking about. Do you think? Have you ever read Frank Dell'Istrito?
Oh yeah.
I mean, so I was going to ask you, what's your opinion? I love this book, A Werewolf Remembers.
That's a great book. I mean, he ties all that stuff together so well. I met Frank last year at Munster Bash for the first time. One of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. And also like I don't know if he's in the Monster Kid, Rondo Hall of Fame.
He should be. He has written a
He
book
should be.
about being a monster boomer.
Yeah, I remember that. What was it? The Memories of, or something
I
like
saw
that.
what I saw when I saw it.
Yeah.
But I've actually,
Well, of course,
funny. I've been friends with Frank for 25 years and never actually been in the same room with him. The closest I've come to
great.
talking to him was I did a podcast like this last spring or summer with him. Yeah.
I went down. I was at Munster Bash last year in July, I think, because Thomas Hamilton was interviewing me for a couple of his Horror Dynasty Horror Icons series. And he's doing a documentary right now on Vincent Price called Vincent Price and the Art of Living. And then he's also working on something he's calling The Cheneys, Hollywood's Horror Dynasty.
Oh, that'd be great. So
I arranged to go down to Philly and meet with his crew. And Tom was in London, and he interviewed me remotely. And so I got down there. I could only make one day of the convention. So I got down there, and Greg Menk was going to be there. And I'm like, man, I got to meet Greg Menk. I mean, what a huge influence has that guy been on, I mean, I remember I kind of embarrassed him when I ran into him with my fanboy, he and his wife. And I was like, yeah, dude, I was like, I don't want to do this to you, but I was like 18 when I read your first book, kind of thing. And I'm 62 now. So, but what a great guy. But I wanted to meet him. So I went to where he was signing, but he wasn't there yet. And I ran into Frank, and he had his book spread out in front of him. And there was, the Talbot book. And I was like, that's you? And I did the fanboy thing all over again. And he says, oh, yeah. And so I gave him a copy of Chaney's Baby. And so he gave me one of his books. What a great guy.
I enjoyed his book on Lugosi and Karloff. Again, I don't necessarily agree with everything, but the book.
Are you talking about Greg Menk?
Yeah, it's so well written and so interesting. Yeah.
I ran into Greg Menk afterward. I talked with Frank, and then Greg and his wife Barbara were coming through the lobby, and I stopped them. And I mean, the detail in that book.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was doing something now, or as I said earlier, I was doing something now on the Lugosi thing. And, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And I, kind of doing this piece on, what it would have been, had they left him alone. And I went on the internet, newspapers.com, because you can do all this great research now.
Oh, yeah.
Not like it was with the microfiche and all that stuff. You remember those days?
Exactly.
And I found I think it was a Hedda Hopper article where she interviewed both Boris and Bela at the same time.
Really?
And they were at Boris's house. Okay. And I'm like, oh, this is like the holy grail of Monster Kid, man. Wow. So I downloaded it, and I'm quoting it in my new chapter, and I'm doing all this and that. And I'm like, I wonder if Greg Menk knew about this. I go over to the shelf. I open the book. Sure enough, he's got it in there, man. With this great commentary about what Boris said in front of Lugosi and what Lugosi didn't say in front of Boris and all this stuff. I was like, I mean, there's certain.
It's become in the last 20 years, whether it's you, whether it's Greg Menk, whether it's Frank Dell'Istrito, and whether it's Gary Rhodes, they have done so much. They've gathered so much information that it just boggles the mind how you can find it. They've got Bela Lugosi's complete career in Hungary, and
it is. Amazing. What Bill Kaffenberger.
I interviewed Bill a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah. And I just found out that Bill's a musician.
He is good musician.
I do music, and I do arrangements, and I just found out that Bill did arrangements too.
Wow.
And stuff like
he's also in the movie Lincoln.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Yeah, I did not know that. I mean, what's been really cool for me is I've been a Monster Kid like all my life, but my first couple of books weren't. About monsters. I was a high school English teacher. I taught for 30 years. Did some writing on the side, My first book was on the trombone player from the band Chicago. Oh. And it takes the band, it focuses on him, but it's basically on the band. It takes them through the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. And, that got some really good reviews, and I made some money. I'm not a bestseller, but, I made some dough.
What was the name of the book?
Called Gimme a Show, 50 Years on the Rock and Roller Coaster.
Okay. Well, try to put a link to it on Amazon, all right?
Okay, Thank you. But none of the band would talk to me because they're very, very, very protective of their story. But I talked to a lot of the ex-members. Some told me stories that they wouldn't let me use. You know, it's sort of like you got to do the deep throat thing on here. I'll tell you the story, but you got to find somebody else to confirm it. So there's some really cool stories about the band that I couldn't put in there because I couldn't get anybody else, to go on record about it. But so I would say it's an 85% positive book. I mean, I really love that band, and I came up as a trombone player. So my second book was called Not the Dude, Jeff Bridges and the Search for Self, 1949 to 1985. And when I put that out, man, I mean, Jeff Bridges has always been underappreciated, and so is my book.
Well, did you ever see Fat City?
He was great in Fat City.
That's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
We did a blog post on it. We did a video
podcast.
Yes,
you and I exchanged comments on it.
We did?
That's a John Huston.
I'm old, like I said.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I just recently was interviewed by a French documentary crew because they're doing a documentary on Jeff Bridges. So they found my book and they said, you're the only one who has written a book on Jeff Bridges. And I'm like, yeah, and I've got to write the second half, but the first half didn't sell. So I'm like, and I was actually researching the second half of the Jeff Bridges book when I stumbled across again, and I don't know how, but I stumbled across again Lon Chaney Jr.'s suicide attempt. Only this time I stumbled across, primary sources. And I was like, whoa, every book I've read is sort of like, it's an also ran. Yeah, he tried to kill himself in 1948, but he resolved it with his wife and they went on from there, kind of thing. It's like, no, they didn't. So I kind of felt like, first of all, one of my favorite actors. He had just reprised one of my favorite characters. The movie wasn't even out yet, but Universal was sure it was going to be a hit. And this could have been, his career trajectory could have gone all. I love Thomas Hamilton's idea. And why would he want to kill himself? And that's when I did the deep dive. And that's got me into that. So, again, my original point was, always been a monster kid, like since third grade, but kind of breaking into the classic horror world, that happened because of that Chaney's Baby book. And I didn't know how many people had gotten a hold of it. I mean, I got the royalties and everything. And again, I'm not making my living off this.
Yeah.
But I got a call or a message from David Colton, and your book's up for a rondo. Like, what? You got to be kidding me! Somebody read my book and put it up for a rondo, and Elvira beat me that year, which I can live with.
I read that.
There's the other guy, Bruce Creelan. He had a book out too about the influence of the First World War on the Universal monster films.
Okay, I want to get near the end because not the show, but necessarily the.
Oh, sure.
You had a passage in your book that, to me, really displayed the contradictions of Chaney, but also his humanity. Some teenage kids.
Chaney's audition.
Interview him. Tell us about that.
Yeah. These guys are connected with the Dracula Society, right?
Yeah.
And somehow or other, they're in their teens. The oldest one is old enough to drive. The youngest one, I want to say, is 13. And somehow or other, they get a hold of Chaney's number, and they get him on the phone, and they say, like, oh, yeah, we saw you at the Dracula Society, where he did a very moving scene from A Mice and Men. And Forrest Ackerman was there and witnessed it and, wrote very movingly about it. So they want to give him this award. And they what? He's not comprehending exactly what's happening here. But, he makes a date to meet with him at a liquor store.
Yeah.
Well, of course. So these three guys, they go to the liquor store, and they mentioned to the proprietor there, they're here to see Chaney, and they're like, "Oh, you're the guys? Okay, yeah. When I saw you, I'm supposed to call him, and he'll come out." So they're looking through the magazines in the liquor store or whatever, and the guy apparently calls Chaney. Next thing you know, there's this beat up car that shows up, and one of the kids says, "Is that him?" And the other one's like, "Nah, that can't be him. This guy's a wreck," kind of thing. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but but it turns out it is Chaney. He gets out, and the way it's written, I mean, it's written with a real emphasis on the comedy. So the way it's written, he's got this, slick back black hair, and his nose is 4 times the size it normally was. He's got these huge sideburns. His shirt is open to his waist with the hair sticking out, and he's wearing what looks like women's slippers. And he can't figure out what these guys want. I'm trying to figure out who you guys are. What do you want? I got to get you straight in my head. Well, what's going on? And he's a little bit more offensive than that, which I won't get into here. But, they finally kind of calm him down a little bit. And they say to him, like, we saw you at the Count Dracula Society. We loved what you did, and we love your acting, and we want to give you some awards. Now, the awards they give him, it's the stuff they had in their house. A bottle of mouthwash and blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh, I could really use this right here.
That's why the bottle of the kind of awards they were giving you.
And then he says to him, well, I'm not talking out here in the street. Where are we going? Kind of thing. And he says, I take you home, but my wife is home playing cards with her friends. So we're not going there. So they go to a diner. And they order some food and some drinks, and the kids ask him questions. The one little one is asking like all these offensive questions. What do your fans think of you when they see you now? What's become of you? He's like, and the description is sort of like he replies like, Rrr. At one point they ask him, what his sons think of his career and what he's done. He's like, why do I care what they think? They're grown. They're on their own. The funny thing about it is he's presented as being this really gruff guy. And again, I mean, he tells some whoppers in there. I mean, the story he tells about the makeup man from 1 million BC, totally not true, but funny as all get out. The cast was so upset with all the hair they had to have because of the makeup man. At the end, they grabbed him and they kidnapped him and they glued hair all over him and they left him in the desert. And then he was dead like 5 months later. Well, it was more like 5 years later, and so I don't know how much of that other stuff happened. But he tells all these great stories. And the thing about it is, he's presented as being, like as I said, this disheveled, grumpy, gruff, somewhat angry, maybe drunken guy. But let's look at the facts. Yeah. Somebody randomly calls him out of the blue and says, we're going to give you an award. And he doesn't 100% understand it, but he's willing to come out and meet them. He comes out and he meets them. He says that they would normally talk at his house, but the place is occupied right now, and so we'll go someplace else. And he goes to this diner with them, and he answers all their questions, sometimes angrily, a lot of times very funny, always very colorfully. And along the way, he's very nice to the waitress. We're not keeping you here, are we? And he's also nice to a fan who stops at the table to tell him that she's always enjoyed his work. And then he thanks the guys for these makeshift awards, gets him in the car, makes a crack about how he's driving this heat because it's the only thing that can contain his potbelly, which by then he did have, and he drives away and he gives him this memory.
His humanity shows through in that, I think.
He did a lot of stuff like that. I mean, he was also a very patriotic guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, he wanted to when the Second World War broke out, he wanted to enlist in the Marines as a cook, and he was a talented cook. And it turned out his blood pressure was too high, so he talked about having a bad ticker and not being able to get in the Marines. And so he went out on the war bond tour. The thing that bothers me, I guess, with what people don't know about Lon Chaney Jr. is how bright he actually was. Yeah. How involved he was in a lot of things that were entrepreneurial. He did a great job with his father-in-law's water heater company. And he also, at one point, wanted to take Army helicopters after the war. And he was going to start a helicopter taxi service from the studios over to Malibu. And he actually had gotten some test flights going on that. I don't ultimately know where the project went. It did not come to fruition. But he had investors like John Grant, who was Abbott and Costello scriptwriter. He had Gene Yarborough, who was working on the Abbott and Costello film Here Come the Co-Eds that Chaney was in. So there were investors in the project who kind of took a look at it and said, like, hey, man, I kind of like the idea,
Yeah, what's interesting is Chaney didn't wither away and die. Tell us what his plans were just before his untimely death. Finally.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, he had half of his vocal cords taken out. Yeah. I want to say it was late 68, early 1969. It's tough to kind of pin down exactly when that occurred. You can see the result in Dracula versus Frankenstein, because that's the film he made right after that. And he was in rough shape. Yeah. It kind of a funny story. I met Russ Tamblyn a few months ago. Russ is I want to say 94 years old. And he gave an interview, and Russ was in and out, but he had a book to sell. And as I met him in line to buy his book, I said, hey, man, I wrote a book on a guy you worked with. And, oh, yeah? I said, yeah, Lon Chaney Jr. He says, yeah, I met him. He was drunk. So that's what Russ remembers, 94. But then afterwards, he's working on that Al Adamson film we were talking about before, The Female Bunch. Much better shape and a much better attitude. The people who were working with loved him. They had him telling stories. They shot it in a dry county. And so whenever Lon needed like a bottle of vodka, somebody would have to get on a private plane and fly out and go grab it and come back and all that. Now, you fast forward a few years, and he's going to do a revival of Arsenic and Old Lace.
That's what, yeah.
With William Shatner. Yeah, now in my Chaney's Baby book, I made a mistake there, and I wrote in that it was going to be a revival of Mad Maid Monster, or of Mice and Men. So whenever somebody orders a book for me now, I scratch that out and
okay. So I did think it was a Mice and Men. Okay,
but it was Arsenic and Old Lace. I made a mistake, and he was going to do throat mics. He was going to have special mics that would pick up his voice so that everybody in the theater could hear it. And when Forrest Ackerman heard this, he couldn't believe it. Because he thought, Chaney was next to death. I mean, there was that notice he put out in Famous Monsters that, if you want to talk to Lon Chaney Jr. or send him a letter or something, tell him how much you appreciate it. Now would be the time because, I mean, Broad Crawford had gone to see him in the early 70s, and he said by then he'd had half of his insides taken out, but he was always up. He was always walking around. He's always doing something. And so Forey called Patsy. And he said, I hear there's a rumor going around that your husband is going to go back out on stage. And she said, yeah. He's learning his lines. He's, which is kind of interesting because later on, one of his obituaries described him as being in agony before he died. Although Patsy told Gary Dorst that the day he died, about 3:00 in the afternoon of a heart attack, that he'd actually been kind of feeling better that day. So... And by then, he'd moved to a smaller place. What do they call it? The beach out in Capistrano. And I think that was the famous house that he said, I always wanted, well, maybe not that one. There was a house that he bought around the time that he sold the rights to his dad's story to Universal. And it overlooked Universal. And his famous quote was, all my life I wanted to look down on Universal, and now at last I can. Yeah.
But he seemed to be working essentially till the end, all right, with wanting to work till the end at least.
Yeah, I mean, Patsy said toward the end that he had retired, but, there was a National Enquirer article on Lon in 1971 where he was talking about still being available, and he was thinking about maybe doing TV. And he said, listen, there's no way I'm going to be a leading man anymore. Mm-hmm. But, I can still do parts. And that was where the famous quote came from, talking about how, the horror films were bad and they really need me. And that was a couple of years after the cancer surgery. I mean, initially after the cancer surgery, he was in rough shape, and he was having the cobalt treatments and all that.
The only redeeming thing about the film The Female Bunch is Lon Chaney Jr. No offense to Russ Tamlin, but I think he's wasted too.
No. I mean, I saw that again fairly recently for the purposes of my book. And there was a great documentary that was attached to it where I learned a lot of stories about what I told you.
Is that the Al Adamson one? Documentary? Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah. And I mean, you watch it now, it's like past for softcore porn.
You
watch it now.
It doesn't save the movie, to be honest, all right?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's, it is terrible.
Yeah.
But it's kind of cool to see him in it. And he is kind of good in it. Of course, he's got the half voice at that point. And his character is so subservient. It's a ranch that's all run by females and no males are allowed, but they let him there to take care of the horses. And he's very subservient at one point. And then finally, he's supposed to go out on a date with the leader of the ranch or something on a Saturday night. And she changes plans. He snaps on a dime, man. Yeah. And he got scary. Next thing you know, he's like, he's going to kill her, kind of thing. And she talks him out of it. And all right, so he goes back to the nice Prasada, and then, of course, she has him dragged out on a horse into the woods, and we think that's the last we see him, but he shows up. I don't want to give it away if somebody's going to go and see it. I don't know how many people are going to run out and go see this one now, but he shows up at the end and performs a heroic act.
Despite his condition, the point was when I watched it with Steve D. Stones a few weeks ago, because I'd read your books. It had a different title in your book, but I found out that was the original title.
Yeah. Yeah.
They had no business calling it comparing it to the Wild Bunch, anyways.
No, they wanted to,
The thing is that
yeah.
he's
They renamed it because the Wild Bunch had been a hit.
the
So
only
they thought,
time I
okay,
perked
well,
up in that movie was when he was in a scene, and
yeah.
if you could do that a few years before your death, dying of a slow death of cancer, that's pretty amazing. Well, Bill, do you have any final thoughts you want to say right now?
Well, I want to say one of the last performances that he gave that unfortunately we really can't see is a thing called Stranger in Town. He did that in '68, and it's basically what I call a prototype Gran Torino. It's a guy who was thought to have killed his wife, got acquitted, but everybody in town thinks he killed his wife. And he reluctantly gets involved with some kids. And the kids get to him, and they kind of change him. And I got to see it because Tom Hamilton had a way to get it, but he's working on getting the copyrights all worked out.
Okay, I'm going to put that on my list. Stranger in Town. I want to see that someday.
Let me see. Yeah. Let me see what I can arrange. But he's very moving in it. He is very moving in it.
Because you mentioned it, you compare it to Gran Torino, which is a great film. I'm interested.
I love Gran Torino. I don't think Clinton Company sort of went like, hey, you ever see that Lon Chaney movie? I think we could do something with that. You know?
I don't know if Lon can handle the growl.
He could be as gruff as anybody.
But there's a growl in Gran Torino that goes through all the time with Clint
Eastwood. Get off my lawn. yeah, I love that film.
So
anyway,
go on.
No, I was going to say, if and when Tom is able to make this happen, Chaney fans are going to be very happy to see it.
Okay, we really enjoyed this. I hope to see your work on Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman soon. That'll be fascinating to read.
I think that's going to be a book.
A book? Well, then I can't wait. All right, that'd be fantastic.
I think that's going to be a book. I'm a few chapters in, and it's shaping up pretty nicely.
Good. And we'll have you on again sometime. All right.
I would love to, man. I had a great time. I love your stuff.
Thank you. You got to read. I'm telling my viewers, you got to read the book. These two Chaney books are really good. We'll put links to them, of course. I actually think that you're doing a good job because I wasn't very satisfied with the biography of Lon Chaney Jr. that was a generation ago. And I think we need better stuff.
Oh yeah, no, it was a good book, and he was comprehensive.
He was. Don G. Smith. Maybe I shouldn't be unfair because I did review it, and I enjoyed the book. I just think there's so much more to learn about Lon Chaney Jr. out there.
Yeah, and I think he did very well with what he was able to get to at the time.
Yeah, this is a lot of this is pre-internet, isn't it? More or less.
Yeah, that I want to say that was '96, maybe '98.
It's a good book.
Yeah.
I just want to, first I have to say this spiel, okay? We're Plan 9 Crunch. You can subscribe to us at Plan 9 Crunch at YouTube.
Please do.
Please do. And we're also on TikTok. I don't know much about TikTok, but we've done a lot of stuff there. You can like
that. I just downloaded it. I had it on my phone, I don't know, a few years ago, and then there was all the worry about, who was looking at you. And I'm like, you know what? Everybody's spying on everybody. So, and my nephew is is editing video.
Well, we may grab something from this interview and put it on TikTok, so you might want to look sometime. All right.
You know what? You make a good point. You make a great point.
And we have a Facebook page called Plan 9 Crunch Podcast and Blog, and then we have a blog itself called plan9crunch.com, where Steve Stones and I, my son Joe, have written. We posted over 1,000 things. And it's doing pretty well. It gets about 3,000 hits, which is minor league, but good for us a day.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same area.
Yeah. So, but we have fun with it. But it's old-fashioned now. That's why we're trying to go to YouTube and things like that.
That's what it's for. I'm not doing this, to make all kinds of money.
No, if you love this genre, you don't make money on it. That's for sure.
You don't make money.
Let me give you an example. I'd like to, when I retire, which is going to be pretty soon, I would like to write a biography of Guy Kibbe. Now, are 100 people going to read that? But I still love to write it, okay?
Well, 101.
101,
I'll read
thank you. Anyways, thanks for your time. And
thank you.
And
I love this, man. It's great talk.
Where do you live?
Well, right now, I'm recently relocated. I was in upstate New York for a number of years. That's where I taught, about 20 miles from the Woodstock site. So you're 75 miles outside New York City. Is that truly upstate? But I've recently located to North Branford, Connecticut. My mom is in a retirement community up here, and my brother is working full time. He's in advertising. He's got a couple of teen sons, and so I moved. We've thrown in together, and I'm helping him to take care of our mom.
Well, I understand that. My parents both have passed away, but I remember their final years. Yeah, I can totally have empathy with that.
Yeah, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough. I mean, my dad, he passed in 2019. He had dementia for about 4.5 years, and you know, and then my most recent mother-in-law, my soon-to-be ex-wife and I, we cared for her, and we made sure she died in her house the way she wanted to. Rough on the marriage.
Yeah,
so
it's tough on those things.
Yeah, it didn't survive. So, but it's okay.
I live in Utah now, Ogden.
Cool.
I think that's where Cleva might have lived for a while.
He was in Utah for a bit. Yes.
Yeah, but anyways, I lived in Boston. Did a lot of traveling up through New Hampshire and stuff like that.
But, I love New Hampshire.
Yeah, and also even into the border into Quebec at the time. But it's been.
Sure.
It just suddenly occurred to me that it's been 28 years since I left Boston. How does time go, you know? But anyway,
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll have you back sometime. I'm looking forward. I'm going to be people read his Substack. It's fascinating. You write much more in depth than I do on a blog. Let me tell you that. Good job. Okay. And maybe not. My son can match you, I think, though, if you read some of his stuff.
All right. Yeah.
Particularly
that's okay.
What's that thing called? Kanjai or something? Godzilla stuff? Kaiju. He loves that stuff. But he did write, if you go to the blog, Joe Gibson wrote 4 articles all on the Karis mummy movies.
Okay.
And they're fascinating to read.
Oh, I got to check that out.
He puts me to shame. I write 700-word pieces. He writes 7,000-word pieces. But anyways, thank you, Bill, for your time.
Thank you.
We always say at the end is, that's a wrap.